Greetings all, Ferrari-Man 601 here. The time has come once again for the new crop of Formula One machines to break cover, and just like they did in 2018, Haas had become the first team to unveil their 2019 challenger, the VF-19. There was a little bit of confusion earlier on when this car was initially launched on the 7th of February. Haas had a livery launch event, and at the same time, they also released images on their Facebook pages as well as on their official website. These images that we see here. The livery launch was using the VF-18, the 2018 car. The pictures that were released on the internet, though, appear to be the VF-19, the 2019 car. And these are the pictures that we are looking at here. Initial impressions of this, our first in the flesh look at a 2019 Formula One car, well, to me, it's a little bit underwhelming, but underwhelming in a good way. Obviously, everybody's talking about the new black and gold livery that Haas have decided to run for 2019, and yes, it is very striking. But to be completely honest, it doesn't matter at all. If anything, it's a little bit of brilliant PR on the part of Haas because they're trying to deflect attention from the car that they are about to compete with. So let's cut through all the black and gold nonsense. Yes, it does look very nice, but what are Haas trying to do with this 2019 car? In this shot, initially, we can see that they are depicting the 2019 spec front wing here, as we can see across the front end of the car right there, like so. The wings are a little bit wider this year. They are now covering the entire 2-meter track of the front suspension across the entire width of the car, and they are greatly simplified relative to what we had in 2017 and 2018. Gone are all of those very sophisticated cascade flap elements, and instead we just have a main plane, and then we have two principal flap sections, one on each side of the wing, and you can see that they're subdividing there, but they are these very progressively raked flaps. We don't have big cascade elements, and we also don't have very sophisticated geometries on the wing end fences here. We can see, compared to what we saw in 2017 and 2018, the end fence areas that we can see on this wing are very simplistic. They almost harken back to things that we saw in the 90s. That's how far back we have to go to see something that's comparable to this. Obviously, the rationale behind the regulations going in this direction is to minimize the outwash that the teams have been creating as of late in an attempt to get the front wheels out of the direct airstream. Having an open-wheeled car means that you have a lot of turbulence and therefore a lot of drag. But if you can create vortices, primarily with your front wing across the front axle, you can create areas of low pressure ahead of where the wheels and tires would be, and therefore you can try, as you might, to reduce drag as much as possible. It's not a perfect solution, and as we've seen, it does have detrimental effects when it comes to overtaking, but it does increase the car's aero efficiency and that it cuts down on drag. The FIA have taken a look at this and they have said, well, yes, we understand the engineering rationale behind this, but it's not good for racing, therefore don't do it. Therefore, we can see that we've got these very simplistic front wing end fences now, in addition to the very much simplified flap elements on the main profile of the wing itself. The wings do maintain that delta profile that we had seen starting in 2017 and carried over through 2018. You can see there the rough geometry of that delta profile, a triangular leading edge on the front wing, still retained in 2019 as we saw beginning in 2017. The other immediately identifiable features on this shot. The nose tip on this car. Haas have always run a thumbnail nose in Formula One going back to their first season in 2016, and they continue this trend into 2019. This is almost an identical nose solution to what we saw on the VF-18 of 2018. And also very similar to the nose solutions that have been fielded by Ferrari since 2017 and actually going back to 2016 with that thumbnail nose. It's a very popular nose solution up and down the grid. Haas obviously have chosen to retain this for 2019. Going up toward the monocoque, We do have a very nice sloping line going up the nose section there, heading toward where the nose and the monocoque join up. This is essentially unchanged from last year, and then getting into the area of the monocoque proper right there at the union between the nose section and the front end of the chassis. Again, very similar geometries to what we were seeing from last year. Additionally, at this point, we can also divine that we do have a double wishbone pushrod suspension configuration, at least on the front end here. There's your lower wishbone, your upper wishbone, and then your pushrod element there running up into the chassis at an angle. That is par for the course, and I'm led to believe that we're going to be seeing double wishbone pushrod front end suspension configurations on all of the Formula One cars once again here in 2019, as we have been seeing since 2017 with the genesis of the current Aero formula. The pull rod suspensions, I do expect to see them at the rear on most, if not all, of the Formula One cars, but pull rod front suspension, I think the days of that are well and truly gone. Ferrari, the last team really to be experimenting with a pull rod front suspension, and they did that back in 2012, I remember, and they had a lot of problems with it. So the benefits of weight distribution and getting your heavy mass components, your dampers, for example, down low in the chassis, obviously they're negated by the technical challenges that arise from trying to configure your car in that manner. Looking across the rest of this car, moving the rears of the front axle, heading toward the cockpit area, there's our halo in its prescribed position. Really no way the teams can modify that in any way. It's a homologated component and a homologated mounting location for that component, so there it is. It does appear to be integrated very nicely with this livery, which is quite good. Haas last year, of course, running a predominantly white car, therefore the black halo really did stick out a bit, but now with it being black on black, it does blend in a bit more nicely. Also something to notice on this car, the mirror mounting stalks coming out from the side of the cockpit, they are markedly longer than they were on the VF-18 from last year. So perhaps the drivers just giving some input there, particularly with the integration of Halo nowadays. Perhaps the visibility was not as great as they would have liked last year, therefore they've got some longer mirror stalks for 2019. Also, with the FIA ruling on mounting mirrors to the halo, they've basically shot it down in most configurations. This is obviously in reaction to this. The drivers liked the mirrors to be a little bit more outboard, but the limitations with the rules last year kind of prevented most teams from implementing a solution like that. Now they've got the real opportunity to go back to the drawing board and put the mirrors where the drivers want them. That's good. So probably some improved visibility for the drivers. The remaining things to be seen from this shot, here's our floor profile. This is the reference plane of the car. Again, we are on an angle here, but just following roughly that profile, moving the rears there, heading toward the area of the rear tire and the top side of the diffuser. We can also see, and again, it's difficult with the contrast black on black, but we can see turning vanes here roughly following this profile, and then they appear to link up with either the side pod or all the way in toward the monocoque proper. It's a little bit difficult to see from this shot, but very similar geometries to what we saw in 2017 and 2018 from the Haas team. Also on this shot, remember, no more shark fins in F1. That was a 2018 addition to the rules, but we still do have these vestigial T-wings back here. Very similar solutions to what we saw on the Ferrari and the Mercedes last year. Haas obviously are integrating a solution like this on this year's car, which is very nice. It's a little bit difficult to see from this shot, but we also do have the new rear wing on this car. These rear wings are mounted a little bit higher, and the profile of the flap element on these wings, it's a little bit deeper, and it does give the wing a little bit more of a severe angle once you get into the flap element of that wing. Also, that's to accommodate the wider DRS opening for 2019. So rear wings have changed in addition to the front wings, not as apparent on this shot, but there it is. So again, led to believe that this is truly the VF-19, maybe not in proper launch spec as we'll see at Barcelona, but this is different from last year's car. And here on this next shot, looking straight onto the car from 90 degrees directly forward, nose on view, this is where we really get a proper look at what these front wings truly look like in 2019. Again, as we saw in the previous shot, they are much simplified relative to last year. They still retain that delta profile, as we can see, going from either side from the center, but the cascade elements that you would normally see in this area here, and then you would get these flow modifiers trying to push the air outboard in this direction to either side, those are all gone. They have been banned for the sake of racing. Of course, the rationale behind those was to try and create vortices going off in this direction, trying to get air around the front tires so that they don't hang out in the airstream for too long and generate too much drag. Most of that appears to be gone now in 2019, but you can see that Haas have retained a little bit of a taper moving outboard on their front wing end fences. Not entirely sure if that's going to be allowed to stay on the car for the balance of the year or even into winter testing, but you can see right in there that is where they are still trying as much as they possibly can to retain some of that outwash effect. Again, we'll see if we get any FIA rulings on this. I must assume that if they have bothered to include it in these pictures, they've checked the rule books and it must be okay. But it does seem to move a little bit afoul of the spirit, at very least, of the rules, if not the letter of the law. Also, an interesting thing to note on this shot, you can see that front wing, these inverted U channels that we can see on either side of the end fences there. These are also effectively vortex generators. And the FIA are trying their best to get rid of these vortices that cause dirty air that everybody's complaining about. But they're still here. There are some other shots where you see that these vortex generators here, these inverted U channels, cut off at about this point on the wing on each side relative to the rear section of the end plate back here. Again, we'll have to get some better shots to see that. Perhaps that is how Haas are choosing to implement their interpretation of the regulations, banning outwash. But there are still vortex generators on this wing, believe it or not. So we'll see if they have any lessened of an effect relative to what was going on last year, but they are still there. So Haas are still trying to create outwash, trying to get air away from that front axle, just so that these big blocks of rubber here don't create too much drag. Also on this shot, we can confirm the double wishbone pushrod suspension configuration for the front end. There it is. And we also get a little bit of a better view now of the turning vanes that we took a look at in the previous shot, again going up. And then they do actually link up with the side pod. It does appear there's a bit of a flying buttress structure in this section of the car right there. Actually quite similar to what Mercedes started to play with in 2017. Now Haas finally catching up with that sort of architecture. In addition, on this shot, we can see the packaging that Haas are managing to achieve here. Roughly here, this is the edge of the reference plane on either side of the car. So there is the boundary of the floor there on its extreme lateral edge. But look at where the actual car is coming in from the monocoque, going through the side pod. That is incredibly narrow, and we've been seeing things like this on these F1 cars really since about 2006. The teams really started to shrink wrap their bodywork, and I remember in 2011 Williams basically had nothing for a rear end. It was the gearbox casing, and that was it. But as the teams have gotten more efficient with their airflow management, they've realized that they don't need as much physical space inside the car taken up by things like radiators and cooling ducts and things of that nature. And obviously, having smaller engines these days also means that you have diminished cooling requirements. But they've managed to get this packaging down so tightly, this bodywork is absolute shrink wrap nowadays. It's just a very thin veneer of carbon, and then you've got all of your absolutely necessary components to make the car run. They are wasting absolutely nothing in terms of surface area presented to the onrushing air, because of course all of that means drag. In addition, on this shot, we can also see now properly the geometries of the rear wing. It is higher up than it was in 2018 and 2017. We'll draw a green line right here to show you roughly what the height of the wing used to be. Now it is a bit higher than that. You can see the top of the wing main plane flap there, and you can see where I've drawn the green line. little bit of a difference there. It's not as visually striking as I was fearing, and that is good. I remember the transition from the 2008 to the 2009 regulations and those very tall, very narrow rear wings. It looked quite obtuse visually. This looks a lot better. I'm very pleased with that. It's not nearly as much of a visual impact as I had feared. Absolutely fine. Speaking of wings, again, returning to the front wing, what do we have going on here? Neutral center section as we have had since 2009, speaking of that. And then we've got our main plane, and then flap elements 1, 2, 3. And I'm unsure if where you see this Rich Energy logo, again, new title sponsor for Haas this year, I'm not sure if that's actually a flap or if that's just part of the main plane, but we do have at least 3 additional flaps moving up on that wing. And again, devoid of the cascade elements that we've seen over the last couple of years, it really does look nice. It's not the best from a visual standpoint, at least in my opinion. I would like to see a little bit more activity going on here. I think also having the wing a little bit wider also creates a bit of a different visual impact from this angle at least, but that's what the rules have done, and Haas have chosen to implement this interpretation thereof. And on this shot is of a little bit lower resolution than the previous one, so apologies for that, but we still can make out some details on this car. I think the resolution of this shot is a little bit lower, quite intentionally on the part of Haas, because immediately my eyes are drawn to what they're doing with the rear wing end fences here, but the resolution is such that we can't really see it. Of course, all of that is also aided by the black on black contrast, but we can see, quite interestingly, that they've split the rear wing end fence a little bit. At least that's what it appears to be. I don't want to put words in their mouth here, but it looks like the rear wing end fence may be split in that section where I've drawn the red line. I'll take it away, and you can see backdrop behind there. So that translates to an area about this point on the near side of the wing. Is that something that we're going to see this year? That's quite interesting. Again, we'll see if that stays on the car. We'll see if other teams do something like that. I'm not entirely sure what the advantage of doing something like that may be, because I would think it would diminish the rigidity of the end fence, and they actually are load-bearing components. They actually hold quite a lot of force when you do get the car up to speed and you're generating downforce. The wing, if you look from the onboard videos, the high resolution versions anyway, you can actually see the rear wings compressing slightly underneath the weight of the downforce as they're manipulating that airflow. So if they've decided to split the end fences like that, I'd be very curious to see how they're making up the differences in rigidity as well as in load-bearing capacity. But nonetheless, it appears to be there. Also, what we can see on the end fence on the far side, you can see that Haas have created some striations in this area. Again, I was under the impression that this was something that could well go away, but unless this is a trick of the light, I am seeing striations or gills cut into that section of the end fence. Interesting thing to note. We can't really see anything else in this area of the car, everything back here, because the resolution is just too low, and conveniently back here, that's where the diffuser is. They don't want us to see it. So yeah, that was quite intentional on the part of whoever the social media manager of Haas is. Nonetheless, on this shot we can see a different angle of the reference plane profile. Try and draw that line a little bit better. There we go. And it actually appears to go up a little bit in this section or inboard. You can't quite tell from this angle before returning back down to the edge of the floor, and then it goes up into a little bit of not quite a turning vane, but it's a triangular winglet element there in that section. Is that a vortex generator? Is that just a little vane? We'll have to find out. We need some better shots of that, but interesting. And the little kink in the reference plane, in roughly this area, that is something that we have seen before, not only on the Haas, but on pretty much every other F1 car for the last couple of years, so that is well within the letter of the law. And the rationale behind that, obviously, as the air comes in, you want to try and funnel it in toward the top side of the diffuser, and then ultimately you're going to be exiting it from this area in this wake behind the car, this area of low pressure, and of course that results in a net force of pushing the car down. So that's where you get your underbody downforce from that flow, those flow dynamics. Anything else on this shot? Not so much. We can't quite see the rear suspension, so we can't confirm whether or not it is a push rod or pull rod. But again, if we were expecting pull rod, you'd expect to see wishbone, wishbone, upright, versus a push rod, you'd expect to say wishbone, wishbone, upright. So again, we'll have to keep our eyes peeled, see if we can find anything else, but for the moment, that is still shrouded in mystery. The rest of the bodywork looks rather similar to what we saw in 2018, very smooth, no little flick-ups or turning vanes or flow modifiers or anything like that in this area. Everything just very smooth, and again, it looks very nice with the black and gold. And on this final shot, a straight-on rear view of the Haas, and the first thing that catches my eye has nothing to do with the aerodynamics, but it has everything to do with the exhaust configuration on this car. This one is a little bit interesting. Of course, we have the main turbine exhaust right here. That is the large center pipe. But on top of it, you can see that we have one, two, turbocharger wastegate exhausts right there. So they are stacking them one on top of another. One, two, three, like that. So rather interesting to see this configuration. I cannot recall offhand whether or not another team has done something like this before. I know that we have seen three exhaust outlets on many, many cars since the inception of the 2014 turbo hybrid regs, but most of the teams, if they choose to run these supplemental wastegate exhausts, they tend to run them outboard on either side of the principal turbine exhaust. So Haas stacking them one on top of the other, my mind immediately starts to drift back to last year where Renault, they had their exhaust outlet, of course, in this same location, homologated in the regulations, but what they were trying to do was angle the pipe upward a little bit so that they could then blow the rear wing from the underside and get a little bit more downforce that way. I'm not entirely sure if that's what Haas are attempting to do. And just looking at this from this fixed angle, I can't quite divine what the exact angles of those wastegate outlets are, but just to my eye, it does appear that the uppermost one may well be angled upward a little bit relative to the one immediately below it. I don't know how much flow there really is going through that pipe, but is that an attempt to blow the rear wing ever so slightly? Maybe. Is that an attempt to create a little bit of a low pressure zone on top of the principal engine exhaust, and then thereby, via Bernoulli's principle, attempt to entrain that flow upward toward the rear wing? Again, maybe. There's no way for us to know that. We don't have access to their wind tunnel data, but just an idea. We'll leave it at that. This shot here also kind of confirms and denies my suspicions before with those rear wing end fences. They've not split them. That was a trick of the light, it appears. But we do have a primary and secondary element of the end fence. Primary element, the upper element, comes down and ends here, and then it connects to a secondary portion which runs ahead and inboard, and that is what is supporting all of the load going through that rear wing. It's interesting to see this cantilevered profile, but we have seen it before, so it's nothing particularly innovative at this point. This also confirms, though, look at the striations that are running down from the end fences there on their rearmost sections. That's very interesting, and again, they're just trying to control some of the outwash that the wing is going to generate, as well as the downwash coming down across the car and then out through the rear wing, basically coming off of the bodywork. They're just trying to keep it from spilling out too much to the sides of the wing and therefore generating a little bit too much drag. They want a very clean flow coming out from the topside bodywork and then through the lower profile of that rear wing. So that is what they're attempting to do there. And we have seen similar solutions in the past. I remember McLaren ran something quite similar to that last year, and I mean, it was the McLaren, but it's a very effective aero solution. So Haas obviously taking a page out of that book. Additionally, here we see the rear profile of what I suppose we can call the T-wing. It's not a proper T-wing because the shark fins are banned, but there it is. Very conventional by this point. And I remember last year making these first look videos, we were speculating about what those T-wings would be. Here they are, and they're basically unchanged from last year. Additionally, on this shot, you can see the support pylons for the rear wing. These are not the primary structural elements of the wing, but they are carrying the hydraulic lines which actuate the DRS pod, which is up here, and that's going to be the device which either opens or closes that slot gap here, and that slot gap is right here underneath the Jack and Jones decal. So that's what's going to pop open when the driver activates DRS, cut down a little bit of drag, increase straight line speed somewhat. Of course, the DRS slot gap is going to be a lot wider this year when the flap opens, so hopefully we'll see an increased DRS effect when the drivers do activate that on long straights. I wonder, and this is purely speculative at this point, I wonder though, due to the increase in that DRS efficacy, let's say, will the teams run longer gearing? Thinking of places like Monza or Baku, for example, or even Mexico, where you've got long straights, and Mexico's a special case because of air density as well, but will the teams run slightly longer gearing, maybe longer final drive ratios, if not simply longer eighth gears? But if you've got less drag now, if you've got higher aero efficiency with DRS, will the teams want to increase the straight line speed potential? Because remember, these cars, once the season starts, the gear ratios are fixed. They cannot adjust the gearing essentially for any reason once the red lights go out in Melbourne. So I wonder if we'll see some longer gearing either in final drive ratios or in top gear, eighth gear on all of these cars. That's something that we'll have to divine from onboard footage once we get it. We'll have to listen to how the engine note changes as the drivers go through the gearbox, but not out of the question. We shall see. Any more details that we can glean from this final shot? Not many. Trying to see anything in terms of the brake duct areas. These have also been simplified a bit for this year. The teams used to run several winglets stacked on top of each other in this section. I'm not seeing things like that on this car. What I am seeing is 1, 2, 3 very small winglets on either side, but I'm not seeing the multiple fan blade like sections that the teams used to run in this area. So that has been greatly reduced, and hopefully again this will have beneficial effects on overtaking. Also, what we cannot see on this shot, the diffuser. Inside this box is the diffuser. Can we see it? No, we cannot. Rather oddly as well, we can't see the rear crash structure from this shot. Normally you'd expect to see the rain light in this general vicinity, but it's not here at all. The other thing, speaking of lights, we don't see any trace of the new rear wing lights that have been instituted for 2019. You're going to have brake lights, rain lights, regen lights, whatever the teams want to use them for. They will be located on the rear wing end fences facing rearward so that cars behind can see them. I don't see any trace of that on this rear wing. Does this mean that this isn't the actual launch spec wing? Possibly, but it does fit with the overall geometries that we're expecting this year. So again, I'm led to believe that this is what we're going to see in Barcelona, or at least very close to it. But it's very odd that we don't see the rear crash structure in this shot. That also might explain a little bit why I don't see any real suspension geometry going on. Is this even a real picture? Is this a computer rendering? It's almost difficult to tell. Based on the textures that we can see on the tires, I'm led to believe that's a real image, but based on the lack of reflections from the bodywork, it could be a computer rendering. And considering that the rear crash structure and the gearbox casing are structural elements to the car, you can't have a rear suspension here if you don't have a gearbox or a rear crash structure. Therefore, is this car even really sitting here for pictures, or is this a computer rendering? I don't know, but that's quite odd. I just don't see it. Very, very strange indeed. But that is what Haas gave us, and this is what they are calling the VF-19 for this 2019 Formula One season. The first new F1 car to break cover. Haas once again beating everybody else to the punch for the second year in succession. That's all I've got for you for now on this car. As we learn more, perhaps we'll return to it, but of course we're also going to be anticipating all of the other team launches for 2019, and I'll be giving you what I think of all of them in due time once those pictures do become available. Until next time, though, I do hope you've enjoyed this one. Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you very much for watching, and of course we will see you soon.